it's great for me to see that we are holding this meeting with colleagues joining both from Geneva, so good afternoon to you, and from New York, good morning to you, and from the West Coast, so very, very early good morning to you. So it's really great to see that the timing allowed people to tune in from different regions, and well, I'll have a look later on in the participant list. I think from all around we'll have people. So actually, let's make the best of our Zoom setting, of the COVID setting, and include that global audience, as we're not now in New York, even if for us, we do consider that in a way a side event to the UN General Assembly session right now. So again, it's a pleasure to host this meeting in collaboration with FES Geneva and the Quaker UN office. And I'll be intervening later on in the chat and also in the question and answer session, but I don't want to take more time away from the discussion. So I'll hand over directly to Ira from FES Geneva. So Ira, please, over to you.
Yes, thanks very much, Felix. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone, wherever you are located at the moment. On behalf of the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, I would also like to express a warm welcome for everybody participating here today to discuss the new report of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, which was presented to the UN General Assembly in New York during their 75th session, end of October. So my name is Ira Gibson. I work for FES, the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung in Geneva, as Program Officer for Human Rights. And it's a pleasure to host this event together with the Geneva Academy and the Quaker United Nations Office in support of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. And I would like to express my sincere thanks to the colleagues of both organizations in putting this event together, as well as to the UN Working Group who approached us in support to this event. And not to forget, thank you as well to our colleagues from the different civil society organizations who are present here today and who will share their views on the report later on. Since the launch of the Working Group's project in 2018, to clarify the practical steps and identify the measures that states and businesses should take to implement the guiding principles in conflict-prone regions, the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung supported the working group in conducting some of the regional consultations, namely one in Lebanon in 2019 for the MENA region, as well as in Ivory Coast earlier this year. This was possible thanks to our FES country offices in these respective regions who are keen to support the project and who reached out to local partners from academia, civil society, trade unions, and others to bring in the voices and experiences from the region. We would like to congratulate the working group again for the fantastic work they've undertaken over the course of the project, which culminated in the presentation of the report. And the report couldn't be more timely given the current environment with COVID, where heightened action is needed by states, the international system, but also businesses to avoid further risks of human rights violations and conflict. The report demonstrates the importance of integrating business and human rights into the peace and security frameworks. And we believe that it provides clarity for the different actors in conflict-affected regions on what they can do, what specific measures and tools they can employ to enhance corporate human rights due diligence and to prevent and address human rights abuse. So I very much look forward to a fruitful discussion after a short presentation of the report. And I'm eager to hear more about your views on it and possible ways how we can now move forward to concrete action. And I here would also like to express on behalf of FES our commitment to support the UN Working Group on this topic, as well as on future projects, in particular the UNGP 10+. So thanks very much. And I hand over now to Florence Foster from CUNO, who will moderate the session.
Thank you very much. And I won't take much more time and we'll get down to business now. Thank you very much, Felix and Ira, for those introductory words. As mentioned by my two colleagues, we'll be exploring the opportunities moving forward based on this report on business-related human rights abuses in conflict and post-conflict settings. And we'll start with Anita and Gerald's presentation of their findings as they've been leading the work within the UN working group. And then we'll have Hannah from Swedwatch and then Patrick from Amnesty International, who will react to the report, identify what is missing from their analysis and where their field could go from there. And then I hope that we will all have all engage in a very sort of candid, informal discussion on how do we go from guidance to action, but also where does the field go from there? And I know that the guiding questions were sent to you on the flyer and on the event description. So I really invite you to engage on the chat, but also in the discussion following our speakers. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Anita and Gerald to give us a flavor of the report and some insights into their findings.
Great. Thank you so much, Florence, and my sincere thanks to all of our hosts, Geneva Academy, FES, and Quaker UN Office for their support of this project and this event today. We'll be brief, and then we really do want your feedback and ideas and suggestions. For those of you familiar with the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, there is a principle, Guiding Principle 7, that focuses on the fact that conflict contexts may be a little bit different. The reason they're different, of course, is because of the heightened risk of severe human rights abuses. But beyond that, what guidance to provide to states and to business and to other organizations was not something that had taken place in the decade that we've been dealing with the guiding principles. So we took this project on because the working group has noticed in the course of its own work and country visits, as well as just engagement with stakeholders in civil society, that the world is still obviously not one that is peaceful. So we decided to look again and to say what more could we observe and what more could we recommend. And as you can see from the report, the first thing I will say is that the report focuses on the entire conflict cycle. So we define conflict by not defining it. It's a broad concept, and we look at issues relating to sort of civil unrest or conflict that may occur at the community level. And we really look and make recommendations across the conflict cycle into peace building and post-conflict settings. So when you think about this report, the recommendations really are meant to encompass that whole scenario or that whole cycle. The second thing I'll say is that I will recommend to many of you that there is a prelude to this report. Gerald Pachoud, who was the advisor to the project, worked with John Ruggie in the development of the guiding principles, and there was a companion report at that time that was issued focusing on the role of states and what they could do to deal with conflict situations. That report has some very useful recommendations, and our report picks up from that. So I'll just give you a couple of snapshots of what we recommend. The first thing you'll see is we use the word heightened action. And I think that's our biggest message, which is that we look to both states and to business to engage in what we call heightened action. How do you know when heightened action in terms of the business and human rights and the guiding principles should be invoked? The answer is that we look to triggers and indicators, as we call them, from the world of atrocity prevention. So the report is, again, a short document, but it really focuses on what are some of those indicators that companies, states, and international organizations should be looking, and that therefore triggering their own sort of higher level or elevated concern and action when it comes to issues of companies and human rights. That's the sort of first thing. When it comes to states, what that really means is heightened action, not just as a state acting itself, but a state really supervising, guiding, requiring companies to respect human rights in those conflict contexts. And so some of the things we mentioned in the reports in terms of the role of states include, of course, legislation. We mentioned the conflict minerals regulations and legislation as an example of, again, states taking heightened action to deal with the conflict situation and ensuring that businesses are the ones respecting human rights. A second example, and I think this is where we hope for your feedback moving forward, is really the post-conflict setting is where I think we have the newer recommendations. What we found throughout our consultations in different regions of the world is that when you shift from an active conflict cycle to a post-conflict or transitional setting, There's just an assumption in the peace building community that companies providing jobs and investment is good. And our message back is that the answer is no, that this is precisely a time for heightened action. So states, through the way in which they allow companies to invest and requiring respect for human rights in those post-conflict contexts, is going to be essential to sustainable peace. So really our focus on states there is that an example of this is when Myanmar opened up, the United States State Department created something called the Burma reporting requirements. It required companies to engage and publicly disclose their human rights due diligence plans and activities because of the heightened risk of mass atrocity in Myanmar as they opened up. So this is an example of looking at the investment and reconstruction phase and asking companies to engage in heightened due diligence when re-entering those markets. A second piece is, of course, heightened corporate due diligence. So we have heightened recommendations for states, but then we also say to companies, you yourselves need to do more. The human rights due diligence under the UN guiding principles and pillar 2, sort of plain vanilla, isn't going to work. That what you think might be salient or relevant is going to be different in a conflict or post-conflict context. And an example that from the report is just to say, for example, religion in the workplace might not be an issue that is salient or the biggest issue that your company might want to address in an ordinary environment. But in conflict, understanding the conflict drivers and context is going to be important. So religion or a person's affiliation suddenly becomes something very important. So we really encourage companies to use conflict sensitivity and to use conflict tools as to enhance and heighten their human rights due diligence. I'm going to turn it over now to Gerald, who can talk about the other piece, which is heightened action by the UN and international organizations, and also our access to remedy recommendations, which focus on transitional justice. So Gerald, over to you.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you all. I'll take the opportunity, just like Anita, to thank the Academy, FES, and the Quakers for the support, but also I see the list of participants. All the people we tapped into during the journey of this report, which is a very nice way for me to say, nothing is my responsibility, it's yours. But more seriously, I think that you have seen the report, and today is really about discussing, but we know what we know in the conflict business and conflict space. We try to go a little bit in this report in exploring what we don't know. The role of non-state actors, for instance, is something that remains a big question mark, even if we have tried to start to identify ways to tackling, but much more needs to be done. Likewise, one thing that struck us that we knew, but that was confirmed during the consultations and our own research, is the role of the peace and security architecture. We see movement from states, we see movement from companies, of course, far from all of them. We see movement, of course, from civil society. The UN, which is in the business of peace and security, is almost nowhere to be seen. And when you try to connect the dots, like we did in the report, you see that the UN could play a huge role, which leads me to the last point I wanted to highlight, is in the remedy space, this idea of transitional justice. Transitional justice and human rights is in and of itself a fascinating discussion with some tensions. We always have the human rights community on one hand who push, for this idea of accountability, where we have transitional justice that is more inclined to do trade-offs. And that's a perfectly legitimate discussion. And then what happens when we add business into this discussion, both from the positive and negative side? So we have tried to once again start to address this question, but more than anything to flag that we need to clarify a lot more, and not just for the sake of clarification, but when you think about the actual consequences of having a clearer picture of what we should expect, demand, or ask to the private sector in transitional setting, it's huge. I mean, the potential impact on people and on justice is definitely an underexplored space. So in a nutshell, those are some of the points that we wanted to highlight in the report. Of course, and something that we don't discuss enough, one of the caveats and the extreme limitation of those reports is that we are limited in space. I always like to give a very concrete example. A UN report is 10,500 words, including all footnotes and title page. And you can't use acronym, which makes it for a deep analysis sometimes difficult, but which also underline the importance of the dialogue that we can have today. And really, like Anita said, today's idea is to get your feedbacks on the report, but even more interestingly, where should the working group go next? Is there something that we missed, which is absolutely possible? Well, I didn't miss, Anita did, but what should be looked at? What is the really tangible things that we should move ahead on? And for those of you who know me and Anita, we are those policy wonks type of people, but we also like to put something that is actionable. So where is the action next? And I will stop there because the idea is to have a dialogue.
Thank you very much. And thank you for both of you to keeping it short and to the point, and also as comprehensive as possible. I think it's useful to know where this report lies within the UN Working Group sort of mandate, and where you've been trying to explore some of the obvious points, but also some of, as you said, some of the points where you actually don't know where it might be going and some of the challenges. Only to mention a few, the role of the UN peace and security architecture, where are the opportunities, but where are also the risks in including some of these discussions? Where do you go when you talk about non-state actors, and where are the pitfalls in going down that road?